Okay, Exile Chapter 25. Sophie tightened her grip on Alden's wrist, forcing herself to stay connected as a flood of images poured through his mind. She tried not to focus on them, tried to let them all wash through her consciousness and fade away. But the Everblaze burned too brightly to be ignored. She watched through Fenton's eyes as he and 5 others, elves in deep orange capes, stretched their arms towards the night sky. She felt his head throb as she concentrated on the tiny pricks of heat radiating from the twinkling stars. But he focused through the pain and counted to 3, together as one. The 6 of them called the warmth down to earth. For a second he ignored them. Then 6 lines of neon yellow flames streaked toward the elves, gaining speed with every second. The others gasped and backed away, but Fenton held his ground, opening his palms and ordering the fire to bend to his will. The flames twisted and collided into an elephant-sized fireball that hovered above him. Tears pricked his eyes as he soaked up the power of a purer, richer, more magnificent fire than had ever graced the earth before. But the blaze refused to stay contained, and the fireball erupted, raining bits of scattered flame. Fenton shielded his face with his cape, but the falling sparks attached to the fireproof fabric and ignited. He tossed the garment to the hungry flames and jumped through the fire line, tumbling across a patch of cool grass that hadn't yet succumbed to the blaze. Coughs racked his chest, and his skin was red and raw and throbbed with the pain. He didn't understand, like being stabbed by hundreds of scalding needles. His first burns. But he was alive, and he was alone. Flashes of orange thrashed among the yellow flames, and Fenton stumbled to his feet, realizing they were the figures of his friends. He shouted at the heat to subside, but the blaze swelled higher, crackling like it was laughing at him. All he could do was watch their astonished faces as the fire attacked, then dropped to his knees and vomited. Sophie felt like doing the same. She tried to shove the horror out of her mind, but it was like the memory was seared behind her eyes. She could only watch helplessly as Fenton fumbled for his pathfinder, hating himself for ignoring those bone-chilling cries of his friends as he held it up to the light. Before he glittered away, the memory shattered. Sophie yanked her consciousness back as the seed splintered into a million glinting shards that were swallowed by the darkness of Fenton's mind. Alden groaned. "Are you okay?" she asked, squeezing his wrist. "He's destroying the things he doesn't want me to see. I have to work faster. Brace yourself." The shower of images turned into an icy downpour, then to a raging flood, but the memories kept wrapping and twisting, and when Alden tried to focus them, they vaporized to a thick fog that clouded everything. His ancient mind was too strong, Alden told her. "If I'm going to salvage my memories, I need you to boost me with your concentration." "How do I do that?" "Send me some of your energy into his mind." "It's like transmitting, but with force instead of words." "Can you do that?" "I'll try." Sophie shoved any other thoughts out of her head and pulled all the energy stored in her inner core into her mind. It tingled and hummed as she wrapped her consciousness around it. When she had a firm hold, she shoved it into Fenton's head, filling it with warmth. The thick fog thinned, but it didn't melt away. I'll have to find another way, Alden told her, but his mental voice sounded wary. Wait, let me try something. Mental energy seemed to be more power than core energy. Maybe a brain push was what they needed. She focused on the energy buzzing at the edge of her consciousness, letting it surge and swell until her head felt ready to explode from the pressure. Ready? She transmitted, not wanting to catch Alden off the ground. On 3, he replied. 1, 2, 3. She pushed the mental energy out of her head in a rush of heat. It wasn't until the force collided against the other energy that she remembered her detritus floating match against Fitz. The first time she'd performed a brain push. Mental energy and core energy couldn't mix, and with the two trapped inside one mind, they twisted and swirled around each other, forming a cyclone of heat that made Fenton scream. Sophie panicked, trying to draw the energy back, but Alden ordered her to wait. She held her breath as the vortex of energy wound tighter and tighter. Finally, the pressure was too much, and it collapsed and imploded, melting away the mental fog and revealing a memory hidden underneath. An elf in long red robes. The feature of his face was murky blur of shadow and color. But Sophie watched through Fenton's eyes as he helped the elf stretch out his arm and curl his fingers into some sort of very specific fist and point it at the sky. Then Fenton jumped back as the elf flicked his wrist, and then a small ball of neon yellow flame sprang to life, hovering above his palm. Everblaze. Alden tried to force the memory into focus, but before he could, Fenton shouted, and a wave of heat shot up Alden's arms, burning Sophie's hand. The scene shattered. The entire stream of memories cracked and splintered, crumbling into tiny, unrecognizable shards. Sophie pulled her connection back before she was sucked into the shadows, but she felt Alden's consciousness slip away, leaving her suddenly cold. She rippled her eyes open as his wrist slipped from her grasp, and his body hit the floor with a thump. Her head throbbed, and her hand ached, but she ignored the pain as the room came into focus. Fenton sat slumped in his chair, muttering incoherently. Alden lay unconscious, a large gash on his forehead, streaking his face with red. Her stomach heaved at the sight, and she tried not to look at the blood as she dropped to her knees and grabbed him by the shoulders. "What happened?" Kikor asked, rushing into the room as Sophie shouted Alden's name and tried to shake him awake. "I don't know. He must have hit his head when he fell." She shook Alden again, but it made no difference. Neither did Corker's slapping Alden's cheeks. Corker wiped the blood away with his fur on his arm and examined the wound. Then he pried Alden's eyes open, frowning at the blank whites. "I do not think the problem is physical." Sophie glanced at Fenton, who was rocking back and forth. His cracked lips were turned up at the ends in a twisted smile. Could he have dragged Alden down with him? Tears turned everything into a blur, but Sophie blinked them back. Now was not the time for crying. Now was the time to be a guide. She placed her shaky fingers against Alden's temples, transmitting his name over and over as she pushed her consciousness into his mind. His head felt cold and dark and was hungrily quiet. No whisper of thoughts, no trace of memories. It was like Alden was gone, and she was wading through an empty shell. "You promised nothing would go wrong," her mind screamed as she fanned out her thoughts, trying to feel in every direction at once. The cold pounded against her brain, and a tiny trickle felt like she was sleeping in. But as she wandered through the darkness, she found something warmer, clearer somehow. She followed the feeling until she reached what felt like a small space, a warm nook, but it was empty too. "Come back," she ordered him. "We need you." She filled the space with memories of Fitz and Della and Rihanna. The people she loved, who loved Alden and needed him and would never be the same if he left them. "You have to come back for them." A tiny speck of light flashed through the darkness. Sophie wrapped her consciousness around it, cupping her hands around a fledgling flame, shielding it so that the shadows couldn't snuff it out. She fed it more images of how Alden's family and friends and pulled it into the nook, a safe place to let it grow. Brightness and warmth seeped around her, flooding the space with memories, happy scenes of family and friends. She stared at her own face, surprised to find herself in the mix. Then Alden's mind whispered, "I'm here." That's the end of chapter 25. Interesting, so keep listening.